The sun was low in the Arizona sky, casting deep red and gold hues across the canyon cliffs. A gentle breeze rustled through the sagebrush as Caleb Morgan, a lone cowboy, guided his horse along a narrow path. He was on his way to a distant ranch, carrying medicine for a sick ranch hand. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the soft creaking of the saddle leather. Caleb enjoyed the quiet. It calmed his thoughts. But the peace was shattered when a sound made him yank on the reins. A sharp cry carried on the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a woman's voice, faint, trembling, and filled with pain. Caleb's eyes narrowed, and he turned his horse toward the sound, his heart pounding. He followed the cry through a dry wash, down a slope where dust swirled around his boots. At the bottom, beside a fallen horse, he saw her, an Apache woman, half hidden among the rocks. Her long, dark hair was tangled with dust, her clothes torn at the shoulder, and one hand pressed against her back. She tried to move, but gasped in pain, collapsing back against the rocks. Caleb jumped off his horse and rushed to her side. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. She turned her head slightly, her dark eyes sharp and full of distrust. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, with a shaky breath, she whispered, "Go away, cowboy." Caleb looked around. The sun was setting quickly, and the canyon air was already growing cold. He knew that if he left her there, she might not survive the night. "You're hurt bad," he said quietly. "I won't harm you. Let me help." When he tried to lift her just enough to check her back, she cried out, "Easy, cowboy! You'll break my back!" Her voice was weak but fierce. Caleb froze, his hands trembling. All right," he murmured. "I'll be careful." He gently felt along her spine and ribs, trying not to cause her pain. She winced at every touch, but her stubborn eyes never left his face. He saw both fear and strength in them, the kind of strength that comes from someone used to fighting alone. "I think your ribs are bruised," Caleb said. "You need warmth and rest." "I don't need you," she replied sharply. "I can take care of myself." He gave a small smile. "Then you're tougher than anyone I've ever met. But even the tough ones need a little help sometimes." She didn't answer. When he tried to move her again, she groaned softly, but didn't fight him this time. With slow, careful movements, he lifted her and laid her across his horse's blanket. She was light, but tense, her hands clutching the saddle horn as he steadied her. Caleb led the horse toward an old miner's shack nearby, a small wooden shelter half hidden behind rocks. He had seen it on his trips through the canyon before. It wasn't much, but it would keep the cold wind away. By the time they reached the shack, dusk had turned the sky a deep purple. He laid her down inside on a bed of old hay and covered her with his coat. Then he built a small fire from dry twigs, keeping it low so no smoke would rise too high. When he offered her water from his canteen, she hesitated, watching him closely. Her pride was strong. Finally, she took a sip, her eyes still cautious. "Why help me?" she asked in a low voice. Caleb shrugged. "Because it's the right thing to do." She looked away, murmuring something in her native language that he didn't understand. He caught only one word. "Nieli." "Is that your name?" he asked. She looked back at him and nodded once. "Nieli." Caleb smiled softly. "I'm Caleb Morgan, just a ranch hand passing through." The firelight danced between them, flickering across her tired face. He could see how young she was, no older than 20, but her eyes carried years of hardship. She turned slightly, gasping as pain shot through her back. Caleb quickly reached to steady her. "Don't move too fast," he warned gently. She gave a faint, irritated sigh. "You treat me like I am weak." He shook his head. "No, I treat you like someone who matters." That made her quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind howled softly through the rocks. Inside the shack, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the slow, steady rhythm of their breathing. Caleb carefully opened a small leather pouch and took out herbs he'd picked up from the ranch doctor for bruises and swelling. He mixed them with water and dabbed the paste on her back using a strip of cloth. She flinched at the cold touch. "Easy, cowboy," she whispered again, her lips curling faintly, as if mocking his gentleness. He chuckled softly. "That's becoming your favorite line." Even through the pain, she smiled for a brief second, the first real warmth he had seen from her. Then her eyelids grew heavy. "I must sleep," she murmured. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "I'll keep watch." As she drifted off, Caleb sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He couldn't stop thinking about her, this strong-willed woman from a world so different from his own. He knew the land between white settlers and Apache people was full of anger and fear, yet, sitting beside her, he felt none of that. There was only silence, a fragile thread of trust beginning to form. Hours passed. The stars came out above the canyon, bright and endless. Caleb listened to the night sounds, a coyote's distant cry, the rustle of wind through the dry brush, and the soft breathing of the woman sleeping behind him. He felt strangely peaceful. When the fire started to fade, he added a few more sticks. He glanced at her again. She had turned slightly in her sleep, her face softened, no longer guarded. In that quiet light, she didn't look like an enemy or a stranger. She just looked human, hurt, tired, and brave. The next morning, Caleb woke before sunrise. The air was cold enough to make his breath visible. He went outside to fetch more water from a nearby stream. When he came back, Nieli was awake, staring at him with a mix of suspicion and confusion. "You didn't leave," she said softly, almost surprised. Caleb smiled. "Didn't plan to. Someone had to make sure you didn't wander off and fall again." She frowned, but said nothing. He knelt beside her with the water and some dried meat from his pack. "Try to eat a little. You'll need your strength." She hesitated, then slowly took the food. After a few bites, she looked at him curiously. "You help Apache." "Why?" He looked into the fire, thinking. "My paw always said a good man doesn't choose who deserves help. He just helps." That answer seemed to touch something in her. Her eyes softened, though her voice stayed firm. "Most men from your world don't think that way." "Maybe most don't," he said quietly. "But maybe that can change, one person at a time." A small smile flickered on her lips before she hid it. "You talk too much," she muttered, lying back again. Caleb laughed. "Then I'll stay quiet and just do the work." As the day grew brighter, he checked her wounds again. The swelling had gone down a little. When his fingers brushed her skin too roughly, she gasped and whispered, "Easy, cowboy." He quickly pulled back, apologizing. She laughed softly. a light, tired sound that somehow filled the shack with warmth. For the first time in a long while, Caleb felt something beyond duty, a quiet sense of connection he couldn't explain. He had met many people on the frontier, tough men, desperate settlers, wandering soldiers. But this woman, with her fierce spirit and steady eyes, was different. By the time the sun climbed high, Nayeli was resting comfortably, her breathing even. Caleb stepped outside and looked across the canyon. The world stretched endlessly before him, wild, rough, and beautiful. He thought of how strange life was. One moment, he was a simple cowboy on his way to deliver medicine. The next, he was sitting in a shack with an Apache woman who had every reason to hate him. Yet somehow, in that silence, there was peace. As the evening light faded again, Nayeli whispered from her bed, "Thank you, Caleb Morgan." He turned, surprised. "For what?" "For not leaving me to die." He nodded slowly, his voice low. "You'd have done the same for me." Her eyes met his. "Maybe." Then she smiled faintly. "But next time, cowboy, be gentler. My back is not made of stone." Caleb laughed quietly, shaking his head. "I'll remember that." Outside, the desert wind sang softly through the rocks, a reminder that even in the loneliest places, kindness could still bloom between two hearts who never expected to meet. The morning light slipped gently through the cracks in the wooden walls, touching the floor of the old miner's shack. The fire had turned to ashes, and the air was cool and still. Caleb sat near the door, sharpening his small knife, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He had been awake for hours, listening to the soft breathing of Nayeli, the Apache woman he had rescued. Every few minutes he'd glance at her to make sure she was still resting easy. When she finally stirred, she winced and held her side. "It still hurts," she whispered. Caleb quickly put down his knife and went to her side. "You'll feel sore for a while," he said kindly. "You took quite a fall from that horse." She looked up at him, her dark eyes serious. "You stayed all night." He nodded. "Couldn't leave. You'd have frozen by morning." Her gaze softened for a second, then she turned her face away. "You risked trouble for me. If your people find me here, they will not be kind." Caleb sighed. He knew she was right. Many ranchers didn't see Apache as people. They saw them as threats. "Then we'll keep this quiet," he said. "No one needs to know." He helped her sit up slowly. She winced, but didn't complain. He handed her a cup of water. "Here, sip slow." As she drank, he noticed how steady she tried to appear, even while in pain. There was pride in her, the kind that made her seem taller than she was. Caleb respected that. He didn't pity her. He admired her courage. "Your horse?" he asked after a moment. "Dead," she replied quietly. "It slipped on the rocks." "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "He was my friend." They sat in silence for a while, both listening to the wind outside. Caleb finally stood. "I'll see if I can find something to eat." He stepped out of the shack, taking his rifle. The canyon was wide and golden under the morning sun. He found a few cactus fruits and some small game not far away. When he returned, Nayeli had managed to sit by the fire, her long hair loose over her shoulders. She looked stronger than before, though her back was still stiff. "You should lie down," Caleb said. "I've rested enough," she answered softly. If I stay still too long, my body forgets how to move." He smiled at that and handed her some roasted meat. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that." She looked at the food suspiciously, but took it. After a bite, she said, "It tastes better than it looks." Caleb chuckled. "You're welcome." For the next few days, Caleb stayed in the canyon to care for her. Each morning, he cleaned her wounds and checked the bruises. She didn't like being touched, but he worked carefully, always gentle. Every time his hand pressed near her back, she'd tense and mutter, "Easy, Cowboy. You'll break me in two." The words became almost a habit between them. When he heard her say it, he'd smile, and sometimes she'd smile back, though she tried to hide it. At night, they sat near the small fire, sharing quiet talk. Caleb told her about his ranch work, the lonely rides, and the people he'd met. Neely listened, but rarely spoke about herself. When she finally did, her voice turned distant. "My father is a healer. He says nature speaks if you learn to listen. He taught me how to mend wounds, to use plants for pain." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "Then you and I ain't so different. I've been learning to do the same." "You learn from white doctors," she said. He smiled softly. "Maybe so, but the plants don't care who learns them. They heal just the same." That made her laugh for the first time, quiet like a bell in the dark. Caleb felt something warm inside him. He didn't know if it was pride or peace, but it made the long nights easier. A few days later, while he was outside fetching water, he saw dust rising in the distance. His heart jumped. It looked like horses, riders coming fast. He ran back to the shack. "Someone's coming," he warned. Neely's eyes widened. "Ranchers could be," he said quickly. "You need to hide." He helped her move behind the shack, near the rocks where the shadows were thick. She crouched there quietly, watching him with wide, fearful eyes. Caleb stepped back inside and threw a few old tools near the door to make it look like he was alone. Moments later, 3 ranchers rode up. Their horses snorted and pawed the dirt. The man in front was big, with a grey beard and narrow eyes. "Morgan," he called. "We saw smoke. You camping here?" Caleb forced a calm smile. "Yeah, just resting my horse. Long ride from Dry Creek." The man's eyes narrowed. "You alone?" "Sure am." One of the riders dismounted and peered around the shack. Caleb's heart pounded, but he kept his hands steady. "Ain't much to see here," he said. "Old place is falling apart." The men stayed a few minutes, asking questions about stolen cattle and Apache movements. Caleb answered carefully, trying to sound casual. Finally, they turned their horses around. "If you see any of them redskins, you tell us," the leader said coldly. "They've been stealing again." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. "I'll do that." As soon as they were gone, he hurried behind the rocks. Neely was still there, breathing fast. Her hands trembled slightly. "They would have killed me," she said softly. He nodded. "I know you lied for me. Did what I had to." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes full of questions she didn't ask. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you." That night, the canyon was quiet again, but something had changed between them. Neely no longer looked at him with fear. There was trust now, small and fragile, but real. As he checked her back, she watched his face. "You are not like most men I have met," she said. Caleb looked surprised. "You don't know me yet." I know enough, she said softly. Your hands don't hurt when they touch. He blushed slightly and focused on the bandage. You'll be walking again soon. The bruises are fading. She gave a faint smile. Maybe, but my back remembers your rough hands. He laughed gently. You'll keep teasing me forever, won't you? She tilted her head. Maybe. It keeps me strong. For a while they just sat there, watching the fire. Outside, the desert sky shimmered with stars. Nieli's face softened in the glow. In my tribe, she said quietly, we say the stars are spirits of those who loved once and still watch us. Maybe they see you now. Caleb looked up at the sky, feeling something stir deep inside him. Then I hope they know I mean no harm. They know, she said. You have a kind heart. I can feel it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was warm, filled with the sound of the fire and the soft breath of the wind outside. In the next few days, Nieli began to move around more easily. She helped him gather wood and even showed him how to crush certain leaves to make a healing salve. Your medicine works, she said with a playful smile. But mine works faster, Caleb grinned. Guess I've still got things to learn. They laughed together, easy and natural. It felt strange to both of them, two people from opposite worlds finding peace in each other's company. One afternoon, as the sky turned golden, Nieli stood at the doorway of the shack, looking out toward the horizon. Soon my people will come for me, she said quietly. Caleb's heart sank, though he didn't show it. You'll be glad to go home. She nodded slowly. Yes, but part of me will remember this place, the cowboy who didn't walk away. He looked at her, unsure what to say. She turned to him, her eyes shining in the fading light. You fixed more than my back, Caleb Morgan. You fixed what I thought all white men had lost. Mercy. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. And you fixed something in me too, Nieli. For a long moment they stood there, two souls framed by the quiet beauty of the desert. The distance between them wasn't measured in miles anymore, but in understanding. As night fell, she said softly, Tomorrow, I think I can ride. My back feels stronger. Caleb nodded, trying to smile. Then I'll help you find your way home. When the fire burned low, Nieli lay down to rest while Caleb sat outside under the stars. He looked at the moon climbing above the canyon and thought about how strange fate could be. A week ago, he was just a cowboy passing through. Now his world had been touched by someone who saw him not for his hat, his boots, or his skin, but for his heart. And as he listened to the soft wind moving through the desert, he knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the woman who once said with pain and pride, Easy, cowboy. You'll break my back. The days in the canyon drifted by, and the bond between Caleb and Nieli became deeper with each sunrise. Her strength started to come back. Every morning she could stand up a little longer, walk a little farther, and smile a little wider than the day before. Her painful back had gotten a little better, but sometimes when she moved too quickly, she would still wince and whisper with that same tone. Easy, cowboy. Caleb had grown used to hearing it. It was no longer a warning. It had become something like a shared language between them, a way of saying, I trust you, without needing more words. On the 5th morning, Caleb saddled his horse early. It's time I take you home, he said. You're strong enough now. Nieli stood near the doorway, looking out at the endless land before them. "You're not afraid to walk into Apache country?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe a little, but I'm more afraid of you getting lost again." She gave him a look, half grateful, half serious. "You don't understand, Caleb. My people don't trust your kind. If they see you, they will not wait for talk." "I'll take my chances," he said simply. "You helped me understand things I didn't see before. Maybe it's time I help your people see me the same way." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes wandered toward the canyon walls glowing in the morning sun. Then she nodded. "Very well, but promise me, and if I say to run, you run." Caleb chuckled softly. "You're the only woman who's ever told me to run. I'll take that promise." They set out together, Caleb leading his horse, while Nayeli walked beside him. The desert stretched far and quiet, the wind whispering over the rocks. Along the way they shared stories, simple ones about childhood, family, and dreams. Nayeli spoke of how her father taught her to read the land, how her mother sang songs to the moon when someone was sick. Caleb told her about his mother's cooking and how his father used to hum old tunes while fixing saddles. As the day grew warmer, the air shimmered with heat. Caleb noticed a line of smoke rising far in the distance. Nayeli stopped walking. "That's them," she said quietly. "My people." He looked at her, reading the tension in her face. "You want me to stop here?" She hesitated, her hands tightening around the strap of the blanket she carried. "If they see you, they will think you captured me." "I'll stay back then," Caleb said gently. "You go on ahead." But before she could take another step, a sound echoed through the canyon in the thunder of horses. They appeared suddenly from the hills, a group of Apache warriors riding fast and hard. Their faces were painted, their spears glinting in the sunlight. Caleb froze. Nayeli turned pale. "They found us," she whispered. Caleb raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. But it didn't matter. Within moments they surrounded him, shouting in their language. One warrior grabbed Caleb's arm, pulling him roughly from his horse. Nayeli tried to speak, but her words were drowned out by angry voices. Then came a deep, commanding shout that silenced them all. An older man on a chestnut horse rode forward. His presence was powerful, calm, yet fierce. His eyes, sharp as a hawk, moved from Caleb to Nayeli. "Father," Nayeli said breathlessly. The chief dismounted, his face hard. "You live," he said in his own language, then turned his gaze sharply toward Caleb. "And this man, why is he with you?" Caleb didn't understand the words, but the tone made it clear. This was Nayeli's father, and he thought the worst. The warriors gripped their weapons tighter. Nayeli stepped between them, raising her hand. "He saved my life," she cried in both Apache and English. "He treated my wounds. Without him, I would have died in the canyon." Her father's eyes narrowed. He spoke sharply to his men, and they stopped moving. Though the suspicion in their faces didn't fade, he dismounted and walked around Caleb, studying him as if weighing his soul. Caleb didn't flinch. He stood straight, even though every instinct told him to be afraid. "I meant no harm," he said quietly. "I only helped." Nayeli translated his words, her voice steady but emotional. Her father listened without reply. Then he asked her something in their own tongue. Caleb couldn't understand, but Nayeli's eyes softened as she answered. After a long pause, the chief finally nodded once. He looked at Caleb and spoke in broken English. "You, doctor?" Caleb smiled faintly. Not a doctor, just a cowboy who knows a bit of medicine. The chief studied him again, then pointed to Nieli's back. She is healed? Caleb nodded. She will be fine. The old man's expression changed slightly to show even the smallest trace of respect. He said a few words to his men, and they lowered their weapons. The air shifted from danger to cautious peace. Still, Caleb could feel the tension lingering like heat in the air. Nieli looked at him with relief, but also sadness. "You," she said softly, "I have to go now. They won't hurt you, but it's not safe for you to stay." Caleb nodded. "I understand." He started to turn toward his horse, but her father stopped him with a gesture. The old man reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small deerskin pouch. He handed it to Caleb. "Medicine," he said in English. "For pain." Caleb accepted it, surprised. "Thank you." The chief gave a slow nod. "You good man. Few like you." Nieli's eyes filled with emotion. She stepped closer and whispered, "Go now, before they change their mind." Caleb wanted to say more, to tell her how much he had come to care for her strength, her laughter, and the quiet courage in her heart. But words seemed inadequate for the moment, so instead he reached out and gently touched her arm. "Take care, Nieli." She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. "And you, cowboy, don't forget me." "Not a chance," he said with a faint smile. "Some people you never forget." As Caleb mounted his horse, the Apache warriors moved aside, still watching him closely. Nieli stood beside her father, her hair blowing softly in the wind. When Caleb glanced back one last time, she raised her hand in a silent farewell that spoke louder than any words could. He rode away slowly, the sound of hooves fading into the canyon. Behind him, the group disappeared into the distance, leaving only dust and the faint echo of voices carried by the wind. For a long while, Caleb didn't stop. His heart felt heavy, but not with regret. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name. The canyon, once just a stretch of harsh land, now felt sacred, like it held a story only he and Nieli would ever truly understand. When night fell, Caleb made camp near a stream. The stars came out one by one, bright and endless. He sat by the fire, holding the small deerskin pouch the chief had given him. Inside were herbs, smooth stones, and a single feather. He realized it wasn't just medicine. It was a gift of peace, a gesture of goodwill. He thought about Nieli, her laughter, her fierce eyes, the way she said, "Easy, cowboy," every time he touched her back. He missed the sound already. A week later, Caleb returned to the ranch. The men there noticed he had changed. He talked less and listened more. He treated everyone, even strangers, with a gentleness that came from something deep within. One evening, as he repaired a broken fence, he heard a sound behind him, the soft rhythm of a horse's hooves. He turned, and his heart nearly stopped. Nieli was there. She rode alone, dressed in simple deerskin, her long hair loose. In her hands she carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Caleb walked forward slowly, almost afraid to believe what he saw. "You came back," he said quietly. She smiled, the same warm, shy smile he remembered. "I told my father I owed a debt," she said. "A healer must repay kindness." She opened the bundle. Inside were herbs, salves, and a small carved figure of a hawk. "For your horse," she said softly. "He looked tired when we left." Caleb took the gift gently. "You didn't have to come all this way." "I wanted to," she said. "My people healed my body, but you healed my heart." He looked at her, unsure what to say. The desert wind carried the scent of sage, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Finally, Caleb said, "I never thought I'd see you again." Naeli looked at him with calm eyes. "The wind carries people back to where they belong. Maybe it carried me to you." They stood there under the fading sunset, two souls from different worlds, bound by something stronger than fear or pride, by the quiet memory of kindness in a cruel land. And as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Caleb realized something profound. He had gone into the canyon to deliver medicine, but he had found healing of his own. The days rolled by quietly after Naeli's return. Caleb had gone back to his ranch duties, mending fences, feeding the horses, and checking the herds. But life no longer felt the same. Every morning he found himself glancing toward the canyon, half expecting to see her silhouette against the red cliffs. The air felt empty without her voice, without that familiar teasing line, "Easy, cowboy." One afternoon, as the sun spread golden light across the plains, Caleb was fixing a broken gate when he heard the faint rhythm of hooves. He looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. A rider approached slowly from the far end of the road. As she came closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was Naeli again. She sat straight on her horse, her dark hair flowing freely, a calm strength in her eyes. Caleb dropped his tools and stepped forward. "Didn't think I'd see you again so soon," he said, smiling. Naeli stopped her horse and dismounted gracefully. "My father allowed me to visit the trading post," she explained. "It's not far from your land. I wanted to see how your horse was doing." "He's strong now," Caleb said, patting the animal beside him. "Guess your medicine worked better than mine." She laughed softly. "I told you, our ways may be old, but they are true." For a moment they just stood there, smiling at each other in the easy quiet that had always existed between them. Caleb gestured toward the porch. "You must be thirsty. Come sit a while." They sat side by side on the wooden steps, sharing a jug of cool water. The sun warmed the fields, and the sound of distant cattle filled the air. For a while, they didn't need words. It was enough just to sit together again. Finally, Naeli looked out toward the open land. "You live in a wide world, cowboy. So much space, but so lonely." Caleb chuckled. "You notice that too, huh? Sometimes I think the land's too big for one man, but I guess that's why I talk to my horse more than people." She smiled gently. "In my tribe, we say loneliness makes the heart listen. Maybe that's why you hear what others don't." He turned to her. "You always talk like a poet." She tilted her head, smiling. "And you always talk like someone pretending not to be one." They both laughed. The moment felt light, peaceful, the kind of quiet happiness that sneaks up on you before you know it. But that peace didn't last long. A few days later, Naeli visited again, this time carrying a small basket of herbs and roots. She offered to teach Caleb more about healing. "So when you find another lost soul in the canyon, you won't make them cry. Easy, cowboy," she said, teasing him. He grinned. "You'll never let me forget that, will you?" "Never," she replied proudly. They spent the afternoon together under the shade of a mesquite tree. Naeli showed him how to crush leaves, mix salves, and recognize the smell of plants that cured fever or eased pain. Caleb listened closely, his rough hands learning delicate work. Sometimes their fingers brushed, and both pretended not to notice, though the air between them grew warm and still. Soon, word began to spread around town. Ranchers saw Caleb walking beside an Apache woman, and whispers started. Some laughed behind his back, others frowned with suspicion. One evening, as Caleb returned from the market, 2 men from the neighboring ranch stopped him. "You've been keeping company with that Apache girl," one said roughly. "Don't you know her people raided this land years ago?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "She's done nothing wrong," he said calmly. "Doesn't matter," the man snapped. "Folks don't like it. You're bringing trouble." Caleb's voice hardened. "Trouble's already here if we can't tell right from wrong." The men grumbled, but left. Still, the talk didn't stop. Some of the townspeople began avoiding him, their eyes cold when he walked past. But Caleb didn't care. He knew what he'd seen: the courage, kindness, and honesty in Nayeli's heart. He wouldn't let others' hate change that. When Nayeli found out about the whispers, her face grew serious. "You shouldn't suffer because of me," she said quietly. "Maybe I shouldn't come anymore." Caleb shook his head. "Don't say that. I don't mind what they think. You've got a right to walk where you please." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "You are brave, Cowboy, but not everyone is ready for peace." One evening, when the sun was setting in a blaze of red and orange, Nayeli stood outside the ranch fence, waiting. Caleb saw her from the barn and walked out, brushing dust from his sleeves. "You look troubled," he said. "My people say there's talk of moving north," she said softly. "The land here grows too crowded. Soldiers build roads through our hunting grounds." He frowned. "So soon?" She nodded sadly. "We must go where we can live without fear." Caleb felt a lump rise in his throat. "And you?" "I go with them. My father is old. He needs me." The wind picked up, stirring the dust at their feet. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Caleb said, "I'll miss you, Nayeli." She smiled faintly. "You already do." He tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "You're right." She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "Don't let this make your heart bitter, Cowboy. You showed me not all white men carry hate. Keep that light. The world needs it." He nodded, unable to find the right words. Before leaving, Nayeli reached into her satchel and took out a small charm made of bone and turquoise. She pressed it into his palm. "It will protect you," she said, "and remind you that kindness travels farther than anger." Caleb closed his hand around it, his eyes burning. "I'll keep it safe." When she rode away that evening, the horizon swallowed her figure slowly, leaving only the sound of hooves fading into the wind. Caleb stood there for a long time, the charm warm in his hand. Days turned to weeks. Caleb worked the ranch in silence, keeping to himself. Every night he sat by the fire, staring at the little turquoise charm hanging by his lamp. Sometimes he imagined hearing her voice again, soft and steady, "Easy, Cowboy." Then, one stormy evening, he heard a knock at the door. When he opened it, rain poured from the dark sky, and there she was again, soaked, shivering, and out of breath. "Nayeli," he exclaimed, pulling her inside. "What happened?" Her voice trembled. A sickness spread through our camp. Many are weak. My father sent me to ask for medicine." Caleb didn't hesitate. He grabbed his saddlebags and supplies. "We'll go now," he stated with resolve. She tried to protest. "The rain." "I don't care," he interrupted. "No one should suffer while I can help." They rode through the storm together, the wind fierce and cold. When they reached her camp, the scene broke his heart. Families huddled in tents, coughing and weak. Nayeli rushed to her father's side, tears in her eyes. Caleb immediately went to work, giving water, boiling herbs, and using every bit of knowledge he had, everything she had taught him. For 2 long days they worked side by side. Nayeli's strength never wavered. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. When exhaustion hit, Caleb saw her whispering soft prayers in her language, asking the spirits to bring healing. When at last the fever began to fade, her father called Caleb to his side. The old man's eyes were tired but kind. "You have helped my people," he said slowly in English. "You have good spirit." Caleb bowed his head. "I only did what anyone should." The chief smiled faintly. "No, not anyone would." He looked at Nayeli. "This one, she was right about you." Nayeli turned to Caleb, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "You saved them," she said, "just as you once saved me." Caleb shook his head. "We saved them together." When it was time for him to leave, the whole tribe gathered to thank him. Nayeli walked him to the edge of camp. The sky was soft and clear after the storm, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. "You've always been brave," she said gently, "but tonight I saw something greater, your heart." He smiled. "And I saw yours long ago in that canyon." They stood for a long moment, saying nothing. Finally, she reached up and touched his arm. "Go now, Cowboy. The land calls us both in different directions." Caleb nodded, his throat tight. "Wherever you go, I'll pray the wind keeps you safe." "And I, you," she replied. As he rode away, the tribe behind her began to move northward. Caleb looked back one last time and saw her standing there, tall, graceful, and strong against the fading light. She lifted her hand in farewell, and the desert seemed to hold its breath. That night, under the stars, Caleb hung the turquoise charm beside his heart. He realized something powerful, that love didn't always need to be claimed or spoken. Sometimes it was enough to have been changed by it. The morning sun rose quietly over the canyon, painting the red rocks in soft gold. The air was cool, and the world seemed at peace after the storm that had passed days ago. Caleb rode slowly through the valley, his hat pulled low, his heart heavy with both pride and sadness. It had been a week since he had said goodbye to Nayeli and her people. Though he had returned to his ranch, part of him still lived out there in the desert, in the quiet winds, in the scent of sage, and in the memory of her calm, steady voice saying, "Easy, Cowboy." Life on the ranch went back to normal, at least on the surface. The men worked the fields, the cattle grazed, and nights were filled with the sounds of crickets and the rustle of dry grass. But for Caleb, something had changed deep inside. He no longer rushed through his days. He noticed small things now, the way the sky blushed at sunset, the call of an owl in the distance, the warmth of sunlight through the barn window. These little things reminded him of how Nayeli had taught him to listen to the land. Sometimes he would ride to the canyon edge after work, tie his horse to a tree, and sit there until night fell. He'd close his eyes and imagine her laughter, her firm tone, and that faint smile she always gave when she caught him watching her. It wasn't longing that filled him. It was peace, the kind that comes when two souls understand each other completely, even if they're far apart. One evening, while cleaning his saddle, Caleb noticed the small turquoise charm Nayeli had given him. It hung from a thin leather cord, shining faintly in the firelight. He touched it gently and smiled. "Still keeping me safe, aren't you?" he murmured. That charm had become more than a keepsake. It was a promise that kindness and respect could bridge worlds that fear had once divided. Weeks passed, and the seasons began to change. The desert's colors softened under the autumn light. Caleb had started visiting nearby settlements, helping anyone who needed medicine or a steady hand. Word spread that he knew how to heal wounds with herbs and poultices. Some called him the Cowboy Doctor, though he always laughed at the name. One day, an old ranchwoman thanked him tearfully after he helped her injured son. "You've got healing hands, Mr. Morgan," she said. Caleb smiled kindly and replied, "A good teacher showed me how to use them." He didn't explain more, but in his heart he saw Nayeli's face, patient, brave, and wise. Months later, while repairing the fence near the creek, Caleb noticed tracks in the dirt, small footprints beside a horse's tracks. They led toward the big oak near the water. Curious, he followed them, and his breath caught when he saw her. Nayeli was there, standing quietly by the stream, her reflection shimmering in the water. She wore a simple dress of soft tan leather, and her hair was tied with a thin strip of blue cloth. When she turned and saw him, a warm smile spread across her face. "Thought I was seeing things," Caleb said softly, almost afraid to believe she was real. "Maybe you were," she said, her eyes bright. "Or maybe the wind carried me back." He stepped closer, his voice gentle. "I didn't think you'd ever come this far south again." "My father passed," she said quietly. "The tribe moved north, but I came back to visit his resting place. It was his wish to be buried near the canyon, where the earth is red and strong." Caleb's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Nayeli." She nodded. "He lived long and proud. He left in peace. That's all a soul can ask for." They stood side by side for a while, listening to the sound of the stream. The air between them felt both familiar and new, like meeting an old friend after years apart, when words weren't needed to understand. "I see you've been busy," Nayeli said, glancing at his hands, roughened from work. "Your spirit feels calmer." Caleb smiled faintly. "I've been helping folks where I can. Learned a few tricks from a certain healer I once knew." Her lips curved in a small smile. "Then she must have been a good one." "She was," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers. They sat beneath the oak tree, sharing dried fruit and water from his flask. Nayeli told him about her tribe's new home, a quiet valley far north, where children ran free and rivers sang through the rocks. Caleb listened with interest, imagining her there among her people, strong and peaceful. After a long pause, Nayeli looked at him and said, "You've changed, Caleb Morgan. You look lighter." He chuckled. "Guess I let go of some burdens I didn't know I was carrying." Her gaze was kind. "That's what healing does. It doesn't just fix wounds. It frees the heart." The sun dipped lower, and the sky began to turn shades of pink and orange. Caleb looked out at the horizon. "I never forgot you," he said quietly. "Not a single day." "I know," she replied softly. "The wind told me." He laughed lightly. "You and your wind." She smiled. "It carries truth, Cowboy. You just have to listen." As the light faded, Nayeli stood and brushed dust from her dress. "I must go before the moon rises," she said. "My people will worry." Caleb nodded slowly. "I figured." "But," she added, her eyes glowing in the soft light, "I wanted to see you one last time, not as a wounded woman, but as someone strong enough to say thank you." "You already did that," he said, smiling gently. "Maybe," she said, "but I wanted you to hear it again." She reached out and placed her hand over his chest, right above the turquoise charm. "You carry my father's blessing now." "Keep walking with kindness, Caleb. The land remembers good men." He covered her hand with his own, his voice low. "And I'll remember you, Nayeli, always." They stood there for a long moment, the desert quiet around them. The sound of the wind moved through the trees, almost like a whisper between them. Then, slowly, she stepped back, mounted her horse, and looked down at him with a gentle smile. "Goodbye, Cowboy," she said softly. "May your path be clear." "Goodbye, Nayeli," he replied, tipping his hat. "May your spirit stay free." She turned her horse and rode toward the setting sun, her figure growing smaller until she disappeared beyond the golden hills. Caleb watched until there was nothing left but the sound of the wind and the soft glow of twilight. That night he sat by his fire, the turquoise charm glimmering in the flame's light. He thought of everything that had happened. The day he found her wounded in the canyon, the laughter they shared, the danger they faced, and the peace they had finally found. It all felt like a lifetime packed into a few fleeting months. He realized that sometimes the people who enter your life aren't meant to stay forever. They come to teach you something, to awaken parts of you that had fallen asleep. Nayeli had taught him compassion, patience, and the strength of gentleness. She had shown him that love didn't need ownership. It only needed truth. As the fire crackled softly, Caleb whispered into the night, "Easy, Cowboy," repeating her favorite words with a tender smile. The wind carried his voice across the canyon, as if answering back in her tone, soft, steady, full of calm strength. Years later, travelers who passed through that region often heard stories about a quiet cowboy who lived near the canyon. A man who healed people, spoke kindly to everyone, and carried a turquoise charm over his heart. Some said an Apache woman had once given it to him. Others said it was a gift from the spirits. But those who met Caleb Morgan always noticed one thing: his calm eyes and peaceful smile. He carried no anger, no hate, only the memory of a friendship that had bridged two worlds. Every evening, he would ride to the canyon's edge, sit on a rock, and watch the sunset paint the desert in fiery colors. There, he'd whisper softly, "The desert remembers Nayeli, and so do I." The wind would rise gently, wrapping around him like an old friend, and he could almost hear her laughter again, light, teasing, and filled with life. "Easy, Cowboy," the wind seemed to say. "You did just fine." And with that, Caleb Morgan would smile, tip his hat to the horizon, and ride home under the endless western sky, his heart at peace, his spirit free, and his story forever written in the red dust of the canyon.